second annual Lake Protector Summit. I'm very happy for you to join us here. My name is Lee Youngblood. I'm the new interim executive director at the Lake George Association. I'm also going to be the timekeeper today. And we have a busy agenda, a lot to cover today. I want to thank Camp Chingachgook for helping us make this possible, this day possible. The staff and the operations department here has been wonderful. So in my short time here at the Lake George Association, I've noticed that our staff how hard they work to keep this beautiful lake in wonderful condition. But we're just a handful of people, and we have a vast watershed to take care of, and that requires everybody's help to keep the lake clean. And how do we do that? One of the ways we do that is to get educated. And we're here today to learn about 5 threats to the lake. And we have a speaker we have speakers to address each of those 5 topics. And the topics are road salt, stormwater, wastewater, harmful algal blooms, and also a new threat, which is the hemlock woolly adelgid. So just to give you an idea of what's going to happen today, the presentations will be about 20 to 30 minutes long. Then there'll be about 10 minutes for questions. We'll have a break somewhere in the middle so we can get up and stretch our legs and come back. You'll see the instructions on the board here. The questions are going to happen a little differently. We want to encourage you to use technology on the front of your program. So everybody has a program they got when they came in. On the front you'll see there's a QR code, which is a circle. There's also a Wi-Fi password. So the steps to participate in the Q&A are connect your phone to the Wi-Fi with the password, because there's no self-service here. And then when you open your camera, point it at the QR code, it'll take you to a form, and you just type in your question, and it'll go to the staff. If that's a little challenging, you'll also find a piece of note paper or a notebook, and you can write down your question, and we'll direct it to Lindsay.
Just turn off the Wi-Fi, that would be great. We are live streaming, and we don't want to jeopardize our signal, so that would be very much appreciated. Thank you.
We love country living, right? That's why we come to Lake George, because it's rustic. We love it. Okay. So you have all that. Following the program, so if your question doesn't get selected and there's not enough time, because we have a full program, after, the staff will be spread out throughout the lodge, and you can bring your questions directly to me or to any of the Lake George Association staff. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speaker. Yep. So our first speaker, Phil Sexton of WIT Advisors. And then he'll be joined by Chris Nowitzki of the Waterkeeper during his program. So is Phil here? Terrific.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Just make sure we're set here. Okay. Yeah. Use the which one? Oh, gotcha. Okay. All right. Technology challenged. So road salt, another 4-letter word. I first want to say, so I think this road salt thing, a lot of times I'm here or in other places addressing what's bad about it, right? And I recently actually wrote an article about road salt in the Adirondack Explorer, and what I suggested there was I think it's now time. Chris and I actually have been working on this issue here for 10 years now. So this has been a really cool friendship that we've developed through SALT. But I think because of the progress we made, and I'm going to share a little bit with you this morning, both what's bad about it and then maybe what we can do about it. But I think it's time now that road salt sort of takes on this new identity, right? Because we're much more aware of it now. Anyone in the room here now, when we talk about road salt pollution of water, is there anybody here, it's okay, but is there anybody here that's not sort of aware of it at this point? Because that'd be good context. So it seems like maybe everybody is. A little bit of important context about me. Right before I started working on solving this issue of road salt pollution, I was a partner of the largest private firm in the country, probably in the world actually, that applies this stuff as a private contractor. So we were a very large company, and I oversaw all of our snow operations as the last part of my role there before I left the business in 2011. And so I used to purchase millions of tons of this stuff and apply it, and this was actually our biggest money maker, believe it or not. So that's part of the problem, right? So there's a lot of issues that go in hand with this, but I think just knowing that I used to be on the other end of this, and back then we didn't know it was a problem. And I'll tell you, even 10 years later after working on this, I'm surprised at how many people still don't know this is a problem. So it is a little bit of an epidemic, just a quiet one. I recently engaged with the folk down in Cayuga Lake. Does anybody know where that is? Down Ithaca. Did you know that the largest salt mine on the East Coast is actually under that lake? Yeah, I'm amazed by that nobody really actually knows that. And it's polluting the heck out of it. Right? But yeah, so it's a huge mine owned by Cargill, and they're trying to sell it. So the other thing that's interesting then, so this right here, I took a picture of these mountains of salt. This is in a place called Trade Point Atlantic, which is down in the, it's just southeast of the Baltimore. It's one of the big ports. And a friend of mine actually owns all this salt. This is Ron Ekman's salt. Those mountains, if you can kind of see, it's kind of pixelated here, but like that is a huge tractor trailer that carries a lot of this. So this will carry about 100 tons. There's about 250,000 tons that you see in this picture, right? So what you see in this picture is what's being applied just in the Adirondacks every year on the roads. The other interesting thing is, so even though we have the largest salt mine on the East Coast not far from us, a lot of our salt actually doesn't even come from here. So a lot of our salt comes from, a lot of the Mexican salt actually goes to the West Coast, and then a lot of the other salts that come across from other parts of the on the other side of the Atlantic actually that hits a lot of the East Coast. So anybody have any idea how much salt is in this barge? Hazard a guess? And this is actually a wheel loader that you can see right there that holds about 5 tons in itself in each bucket. So there's about 50 to 55,000 tons on this barge that's coming across. So not only are we polluting our waters with our own salt, but a lot of our water is actually being polluted by salt that's coming in from somewhere else. And it's a very interesting issue to me because there's no other material that you can import into the United States without a major permitting process because of the contaminants that are in it. For some reason, we don't consider salt a contaminant, even though it is a pollutant designated by the EPA, right? So it's just very interesting. It's highly unregulated. And then imagine just, the freight and the carbon footprint. So it's very interesting, the life cycle of salt as well, of what it's costing us, right? So the specific problem that we're dealing with here in Lake George, and really in any water body where it's impacted by road salt, is simply it's non-point source runoff that, unlike any other pollutant, or most other pollutants, it never biodegrades. So like we talk about fertilizers and pesticides and all those other nasty things that we get in the water too, and I've dealt with a lot of that stuff too. Those are treated a little bit differently though. Some of those do biodegrade. Some of those, the solution, the pollution is dilution in some cases. In this case, that's not what happens here. And so there was a chart that Chris showed me 10 years ago. Since we've been measuring in the 80s in Lake George and other places, you just see this continuous trending or rise of accumulation of salt. And so because what happens is the chloride, so sodium chloride is the typical salt used, it's the chlorides that actually accumulate, right? So it's not just the sodium, right? So we think about sodium when we think about drinking water, but now we're having to look at chloride when we even think about drinking water. And so in this case, it settles to the bottom and then it accumulates. And then over time, it's actually, impacting the actual ecosystem, including fish, let's say, right? So it permanently pollutes the water. 1 teaspoon of salt pollutes 5 gallons of water. 1 teaspoon, right? So if you can imagine how many teaspoons are in that 250,000 ton piles, we're polluting a heck of a lot of water forever, right? At least in our lifetime. And then the other interesting thing, this is actually how I got involved, is one would assume that most of this is coming from the big trucks on the big roads. So I want you to think about it in these terms, though. A lane mile of road. So if you drive up this road, on one side of the road, a lane mile of road is semi-equivalent to an acre of parking lot. So if you think about any commercial district in particular, anywhere in the country really, think about how many lane miles of parking lot are on each side of that lane mile of road. So for every lane mile of road, you might have 100 miles of parking lot. And so that's where a lot of this comes from as well. So in the Adirondack Park, it's a little bit unique. We do think more of it's a road system issue, but then there are pockets like just even in the south end of the basin here, there's a lot of parking lot. And so one could assume that a lot of that comes from here, from those parking lots. And that's why I got involved with this, because it suddenly put the target on to the back of the private industry, and I was the biggest player in that at one time, and I was the guy buying all the salt. So I've always joked, for those of you who've heard me speak before, this is a little bit of my penance, if you will. So the other bottom line is this, though, and this is what's interesting to me as a contractor, is that makes money at this, is there is a lot of waste, right? And a lot of the waste is just simply because we don't want to change. A lot of the waste is because there is some liability attached to this, right? Both in vehicle accidents and slip and falls. And so there's a diversity of political, economic, environmental, social, technological, legal issues. We call it PESTEL, but there's a lot of different issues that are surrounding this in what's, again, pretty much a completely non-regulated issue, right? So it's just fascinating to me that, how complex the issue really can look at once you understand everything that's going on with it. So it's not just here. This map actually probably needs to be updated. I wrote an article about this a few years ago, and really when I started to study this, a lot of this issue was sort of discovered in the Twin Cities of Minnesota, where all of their drinking water there, primarily most of it is from wells, which a lot of people don't know that either. And they're all highly contaminated. And so they've been trying to work on this for about 20 years. And so I got involved with that during my time in the industry. Out in Kitchener-Waterloo area, there's a program that they started years ago called the Smart About Salt program. That was also in response to the same issue. All of their drinking water there is wells as well. So, and then in New Hampshire, they started something called the Green Snow Pro certification in response to a construction project. They wanted to widen the I-93 corridor from South Boston up into the Lakes districts of New Hampshire, and that got stopped because of some small water bodies that were just highly contaminated with this stuff, and they thought it was coming from the DOT. So if you go back to this was their DOT's response to it. They had been studying this too and said, we're actually only less than 10% of the problem. So try again. And that's where this certification was born, which, there's been a diversity of arguments whether that even works, right? Because it's voluntary, but it was a good start, right? And but there is a limited liability legislation attached to it, which was interesting. And then that program that I got involved with there is actually, I think, what introduced us together, Chris, here. And so that's when we started working together, um, again, 10 years ago. And I will tell you, we work on this issue in a lot of different places, including all of these places. There's something very special about the model that's been created here. This is the model that actually works. And so that's an exciting thing that we've seen. I still think we got a long way to go because scaling the success is really the next challenge. But we've consistently, wherever we're working on this, either with a municipality or private organization, we've been able to reduce by 50% or greater, right? And 50% was sort of our initial target years ago. We thought that's just through the science that Chris and Jim Sutherland have done in particular. We know that could actually sort of help stop the trend or at least start to reverse the trend. And Chris can speak more to where they've actually seen that at a water level now. Chris and I both worked together on the Governor's Salt Task Force that was created a few years ago. I think that's finally getting some legs now in legislation. I think Chris and I would both agree that the pace of government is frustrating at times, but I think we're getting somewhere now, right? And then a lot of what's been going on here has inspired other initiatives, including park-wide now, Adirondack Park Ride, the Clean Water Safe Roads Initiative, which LGA has done a nice job of collaborating with ADK Action on sharing some of the successes there and how that works. So getting directly into the solutions, I think from my perspective, one of the foundational approaches that I think was unique and I think is now being duplicated throughout different parts of not only the state but the country is what I call, we were the Fund for Lake George back when we started, but the LGA model really is, there was this memorandum of understanding that at least got the ball rolling, at least got some folks to sort of semi-commit to following some best practices. And then that's really where the SWIM standards of policy for measuring, calibration, prevention, analysis, improvement, optimization, that's where that was born. And so that's really the standards that we've been following here in Lake George ever since, right? And just trying to help both municipal organizations and private organizations follow those. Standards of policy enable standards of process. Processes enabled through technology, methodologies and technology. And so you may have heard about, we used to call them years ago the black boxes, but we started measuring salt very consistently in every truck that we work with. We're measuring level of service. The technologies include things like segmented plow technologies. You've heard of like live edges, probably some of you. And so through our work with LGA, we've introduced all that into this region, and it's been quite successful. The biggest thing that I stress, though, is with all the best tools and technologies, this is very much a culturally embedded issue. And that's really where our work either starts or stops, right? So many, for as many successes as we've had, we've been turned away too, right? People just don't want to change how they do things. And so I think that we're finally getting over sort of the hump of that. So I think the tipping point, we've started to tip in the right direction more consistently now. And that's, I think, where the scale happens, right? And a lot of what I think happens with culture is like just all of us in this room, right? We're part of the culture here of the basin. We're part of the culture of how salt's used, because as much as I think you could all agree, even just through what you've just heard, ooh, salt bad, right? Ooh, slippery road bad too. Ooh, I've got to get somewhere at the same time every day. If I can't, that bad too, right? So I don't know why I'm caveman suddenly, but it's that's the issue, though, right? Is we're also a little bit of the Amazon Prime society, and we expect what we want when we want it now. And so that's why a lot of times when we like to point even to the New York DOT for, well, look at how much salt they use. It's like, well, you also have to look at how much we yell at them, how much we expect of them. Everybody's critical of them because, oh, they have a bare road. It's like, well, it's because we kind of created it, right? So we're the customer, they're the service provider. So I'm used to being the service provider. I'm used to being yelled at. And you don't want me to pollute the water, and you also don't want me to give you anything less than what you expect. It's a really tough balance. It's a really tough balance. So, and then if you think about just at your own homes and your own driveways, where do you contribute to this, right? So, if you took a coffee mug, if you have a 10 by 100 foot driveway, all you need is a coffee mug, not half the bag. Right? How many of you are using half the bag? We all do it, right? Again, I was the biggest user, so. And then I think what's really happened then is this whole issue, and I think this is again where society plays a role in this, but where we play a role in engaging society is, this is where I think SALT again can take on this new identity. So we've actually created a whole community, in my opinion, based on this issue, right? So this picture here really is just like 10 years ago, we didn't have these pictures. 10 years ago, nobody wanted to get involved with this. And now we're in barns, we're in shops, we're in offices, we're in conference rooms, we're talking about this, we're training people, they're implementing change. And so, and getting excited about it. And so I think that's the thing that's exciting for me now is, I think now that we're at that tipping point, we're going to see a lot more scale here, even in the basin. So I hope that's helpful, at least, beginning awareness for you all. It's my first time at this summit. I know you started this last year, so this is exciting to be here. If you do need to find me, I get really excited about talking about this. If you can't tell, if you need to find me, that's my email. I think it's in the agenda as well, but feel free to reach out, and I'll be here for the day.
Thanks, Phil, and it's been great working with Phil. I'm Chris Nowitzki, Lake George waterkeeper, and every time I hear him speak, I learn something new. And he was showing the barge from Mexico with the salt, and I think some of that's for margaritas myself, but a lot of it does wind up on the road. So partnering with Phil over the years, I'm going to close this out by talking about the LGA and what we've worked on. And give some information about what homeowners can do. But working with Phil over the past 10 years, we've probably invested about $1.5 million in the Lake George initiative for the live edge plows, for the training that they do to all the highway departments. So that's been a big investment, and as Phil said, we've actually seen towns, the town of Hague has reduced their road salt by 50%. So it's real encouraging, and we've got a ways to go, but here's that slide, sorry. I was introducing that. So one of the big projects, we worked with New York State DOT. We've got great relationships with the town, we have great relationships with DOT, but it was through our SAVE partnership with the municipalities. We met with DOT and said there's a problem going on. They actually implemented one of the first pilots along Route 9N, and this is right at the base of County Route 11, just north of Bolton, where they actually have a 17-mile stretch on road salt reduction. And we actually put together a study. We proposed it with DOT. They did not partner with us, so we, as the fund LGA, took that on. We've invested about $250,000. I've studied that over 6 years. Got a Lake Champlain Sea Grant for that, and what we found, we found mixed results, actually. It was difficult. We actually selected 4 areas where there was no other influence except the state highways, which is not that easy with all the upland development, with all the town roads up on the highlands. But that way we could just isolate what the influence of the state practices were. So we set up instrumentation. We actually sample above the road and below the road so we can just isolate the influence from the road. And we did find that New York State DOT did reduce their application rates. They reduced them by about 15%. However, they wound up going out 2 to 3 times more often because, as Phil said, that cultural change. So they were putting down less salt, but to make sure, they actually went out 2 to 3 times more often. It wound up actually increasing salt loads in the streams that we were measuring. And here we are. You can see us gauging. This is actually English Brook right there, one of our stations. And I put this one in the middle. People think that, you know, being a water keeper is great, but it's not always just sitting on a boat. You have to go out and chop through ice, and your hands are freezing to try and get these samples. But the other thing that we found is that there's a big problem with groundwater. We were finding that, and we would get the information from DOT, actually there were 4 times as much salt in chlorides in the streams as what they put down that year. So what does that say? Our groundwater is actually becoming reservoirs holding those chlorides, as Phil said earlier. And that's a big problem. But good stuff came out of this, because this past year we saw DOT brine more on Route 9N this one year, this past summer. It wasn't that bad, than they did over the past 5 years combined. So we are getting somewhere. Phil talked about the graph of Lake George, chlorides increasing like that, but if we cut the road salt in half, it'll take 25 years to see that reduction in Lake George. So it is possible, big lake, but that was findings that we found from our Finkel Brook study that we've had going on for 10 years. The Road Salt Task Force, as Phil said, we were both part of that. These are some of the recommendations on reduced targets, BMP's best management practices, snow and ice removal training, very important. We've got to train our highway departments, and we've got to make sure that they're aware of the new technology. Public access to data. We should have the right to know what's going on, as well as rapid response. I don't know what happened here. I'm just going on. I can't. Help. Our Salt Summit, it's coming up. October 1st, we're going to actually move it back up to Lake Placid again. So we'll have information on that in the future. And what can you do on your properties? Shovel early and often. You know, I have a 17-year-old daughter who now drives. You know, we get the snow. We didn't have a lot this year, but, you know, she drives out. I'm like, no, don't drive out on the snow. We've got to shovel first because it's going to get packed and this and that. Use an ice chipper. Apply only what's needed. Phil said what you really need is just a coffee cup. Reposition your downspouts. How many people have downspouts that go right out on their driveways or sidewalks? No, then you're creating ice. You know, direct that elsewhere. Pile it properly. You know, don't put it on the uphill side. Put it on the downhill side of your driveway. Use salt-tolerant plants. That way the vegetation won't get scarred. And join the Salt Watch. That's a program by the LGA. You can get in touch with Lindsay and find out. You can actually do some citizen monitoring where you use little like pH strips almost to check the levels of salt. So with that, I don't know if we have questions.
We do have a few questions, and I do also, for the Salt Watch program, I did bring a few little visuals if anybody wants to check that out at the end. But we have a question: how much has pre-treating with salt brine helped with salt reduction?
Well, Phil's going to let me handle that because he's way back there. But I think it's really initially it saves at least one pass by the drivers, because if they go out, think of when you cook. What do? You spray your pan so that food doesn't stick. So that's the same thing with the brine on the road. You put that on the road so that the snow will not stick. And what it does is actually buys those drivers probably time to get out a little later in the morning. They don't have to get out right away. So at least, one pass of the truck. So you can be reducing it by about 25, 30%.
Thanks, Chris. Any other questions? These guys will be hanging out after at the meet and greet, so feel free to ask then.
Thank you very much, Chris and Phil. That was a very important presentation. Next, we have Jim Liebram, Warren County Soil and Water. And in a few minutes, Jim will be joined by Monica LaPlante of the LGA.
Thank you. All right, so it's a little unusual for me to, one, use a microphone and stand still. I've been trained not to. I have an active 7-year-old boy, and he keeps me on my toes, so I'm going to try to stay in one spot and not over talk into the microphone. I've never been accused of not being heard, especially by him. So today I was asked to discuss stormwater, and it's something that our office has dealt with since I started with the district almost 30 years ago. It's an interesting concept, and something that I've learned through the years is that when you're working in nature, whether you want to accept it or not, everything is a system, and I usually say everything comes back to physics, but that's, things that I kind of look at it. So when we're looking at stormwater and stormwater runoff, it's not just it's not just the water we're concerned with for a couple of reasons, but it's also materials. And this slide right here, this is actually not in the Lake George watershed, but this happens in the Lake George watershed. It happens in the Schroon Lake watershed. It happens in the Upper Hudson watershed. It happens everywhere. This was actually, if anybody's down in the Glens Falls area, this is years ago down in Coles Woods this occurred. And it's because a valve was left open on the water tank when they were flushing it, the big water tank, and that's what happens. It's, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and you have to watch out for that. But what is stormwater? So stormwater, the simplest definition for stormwater runoff, and I like to say that a stormwater runoff is water that doesn't infiltrate into the ground. That water is going to flow somewhere or infiltrate. There is no other option at that point. If it stands still for a long enough period of time, it could be taken up by plants and transpired off. It could evaporate off, but it's kind of constantly moving one way or the other. Stormwater itself isn't inherently problematic. It's what formed the world. And erosion is a natural process also. Cuts and fills. Streams erode every second of every minute of every day for our lives. We generally don't have as much of a problem with stream erosion on a lot of our streams because honestly we don't live in a long enough period of time to recognize that there's a problem. Only after there's a significant storm event, such as up in the Ausable. Is anybody from Hague here? Yeah, you folks have experienced some pretty significant storm events in the last 10 years that have altered stream paths. That's where you start having a lot of people recognizing that maybe stormwater and erosion are issues. But what's in there, we're looking at, litter, sediment, pesticides, fertilizers, animal waste. So you're looking at dogs, basically, and chemicals from autos off of the road. So when we have that, but then you have other events that are beyond our control, okay? This is from the Western fires last year. It's you can see the sun up there. I took that picture, and we're impacted what goes on. Have additional carbon. Are elements that plants need to, it's just like Friday night, should you have 1 or 2 sarsaparillas, or do you want 4 or 5? It's not good for us to have too much of any one thing. So when our plants start feeding on more phosphorus when we're in water, we're going to have problematic issues. And it causes issues not just beyond having vegetation, but changing how the water flows in our streams, warming of the water, and things of that. And then you have the other items, which I'll leave to Phil and Chris to, if they want to talk about with. I'm not a chemist, so the volatile organic compounds and basically anything that ends in ENE that you read about. So I had to look that up. It had to be true. It was on Wikipedia. So, and here's an example of kind of actually going back to what Phil said. We are responsible for what's going on out there. Why? Because we drove up Pilot Knob Road to come here, and we parked in a parking lot. And even gravel parking lots over time become compacted, and they reduce or eliminate the availability for water to infiltrate. The DEC recognizes that, and actually a gravel driveway is considered an impervious surface because of constant compaction. You have water applied to soil or small stone or material where it's a combination. You apply pressure, time, water, it just builds up, and you make a compacted layer. People who tear up big box stores, parking lots. The soil underneath the parking lot that's been sitting there for 20 years is probably not any better for infiltration than the parking lot itself. And I would argue you're better off leaving the macadam on there because you're not going to have erosion from the macadam. So it's something you have to kind of get your head around and evaluate, pros and cons of the whole thing. We are seeing a lot of changes, and we see because of our types of rainfall that we have. But what influences stormwater runoff? Well, our drainage area. So when we're looking at, let's say that you're concerned about a driveway, your house, you're looking at a small drainage area potentially, but what is the topography? How much of it is impervious? We have a grant to do some work in the city of Glens Falls. Ultimately, the water flows over to Sanford Street by the BOCES school, and it's 114 acres of watershed, and 95% of it is impervious. Completely different than up here, in a lot of places. So we have to deal with those differently. Storage, wetlands, ponds, other lakes, how much is held back? Again, our type of rainfall events. Our 100-year storm, or what's termed for the general public is a 100-year storm, which is a 1% chance of that type of storm occurring at any given point in the year. You can have 2 of them in a week, 3 of them in a week, 4 in a week. You get to 3 or 4, those are very good odds that you go, wager with, So when you have that 100-year storm and you're in our county, doing some comparisons of data from 1990 to today, different data sources, it was USDA and now Cornell, we have an average increase over a 24-hour storm, which is kind of plotted for engineering purposes, and that's that 1 out of 100 event. We have an increase somewhere between 1/2 and 3/4 of an inch of rain. Or there's a broader range too. It could be a little lower, but it could also be 1.5 inches more. So you're dealing with a lot of uncertainties. And the big changes, as we have more water, as we have more development, as we have an alteration from the natural landscapes, we change our peak rate of discharge and the time of concentration because we're getting more water through the system faster. So the culvert that goes underneath your driveway might have worked for 40 years, and now all of a sudden, because new roads are put in, more houses are put up, there's more water coming to that point at that given time, okay? It's nothing you did incorrectly. It's things that are kind of beyond your control. So it's understanding the reasons why we have problems is important. Some of them are more solvable than others. But getting into some projects, one of my favorite things that I get to work on is the Westbrook Conservation Initiative. I'm sure many of you have been there. If you haven't and you have kids or grandkids, bring them there. It's a wonderful little park at the south end of Lake George. It's a stormwater wetland. This time of year, you're going to see turtles. Those are 11 or 12 different painted turtles sitting on a log that we threw in there. If anybody wants to get goodwill in a community and there is a pond, get a cedar log and anchor it in the pond, and you will have goodwill for the rest of your life from the community. It is amazing how many people love to see turtles sitting on the log sunning themselves. And it's a great feel-good thing, and it makes us feel good because the people enjoy it, their kids remember it, and it makes a memory. But this is functioning as a stormwater filtration system. Water's coming off of State Route 9 in Lake George as we're heading towards the village. This is Westbrook, and it flows through a circuitous path, depositing sediment primarily in the first pond, dropping it along the way. But then because we have almost a monoculture of cattails, which really wasn't intended, we have a significant uptake of nutrients as phosphorus, nitrogen, and at some point I'm going to assume heavy metals. I don't think Dr. Sutherland has looked into that, but it's functioning very well from the last reports. It's meeting and exceeding its standards and goals that were set for phosphorus and nitrogen. But going back to Phil's comment, doesn't do anything for salt. That's a management technique, right? It's not, can't retain it. It's a change in how we manage. So this all came about as a thought process in the early to mid 90s with Tom Jarrett and Jim Sutherland saying, hey, we have to do something. And this is from the National Urban Runoff Pollution Program. There were not many lakes that were initially in the program. I know Lake George was one, and I think Tahoe was one of them, and they expanded it through there. But basically, let me drop my glasses here. Runoff from developed areas account for 14% of the annual phosphorus loading to Lake George, which is 15.5% of the load to the South Lake, and 6.6% of the load to the North Lake. In addition, developed areas contribute 62.9% of the annual phosphorus load to the study area to the south end of the lake. Well, I think we can agree that the biggest impacts from stormwater in the lake are in the south end, so let's focus on some of these problematic areas. And if we're looking at what we can do through non-point source reduction, this is a great method to do it. It is truly a wonderful little wetland that we get to manage. Trinity Rock, this was a project that we partnered with the LGA, the town of Lake George. We got a grant from the Lake Champlain Basin program. I believe it was the Lake Champlain Basin program. I might be incorrect, it might have been the DEC. But there was basically just an inlet with a pipe that went right down to the lake. This is up in the town of Lake George. Landowners were asking for assistance. The three groups partnered together. This just pass-through system was removed, and a hydrodynamic flow separator, and in this case it's called a CDS unit, continuous deflective separation, which is nothing more than if you have a Dyson vacuum cleaner, it's that tornado action. So as the water goes through, it's not being, there's no hydraulics as far as what's moving anything. This is all through how the water's entering. It spins around solids such as sand, some silts, other heavier materials ends up here. Then you have some debris going down. You'll have some garbage up top. You'll have oils and grease and things like that. Think of a septic tank, kind of a combination of that with the vacuum cleaner. That's what it looks like on the inside. That's what it looks like installed. And, where did the shrubs come from? So our office does planning, but we do a lot more. We actually planted them. It was one of my staff and I. We go over. There's 5 technical staff in our office. I'm the district manager, but I'm kind of a field manager, so I work a lot in the field too. So we actually go out and do the plantings. We did the seeding. We did the mulching, and it worked out really well. So we've actually been awarded a phase 2 section to this grant from the Basin program, and we're working down below, and hopefully we'll remediate the rest of the issue in that area. Working again with the LGA on I-87 in New York State DOT. Removing a lot of macadam swales that carried stormwater directly into Lake George. So you're not doing anything with salt, again, but we can reduce phosphorus, we can reduce nitrogen, we can reduce sediment, and we can reduce thermal fluctuations to the streams from this time of year into September, where macadam, the blacktop swales, are going to heat up to about 135, 140 degrees. That cold storm that comes through on July 17th is going to hit it. You have warm water going down into our cold water streams for trout. We're disconnecting that as much as possible. This was a very good project because it got our local DOT out of the same old, and actually, it, the resident engineer at the time was very on board with it, but so was their staff. And when the staff's on board with it, you can do a lot. So we seeded, mulched, used erosion and sediment control blankets, used wildflower seed in some areas, and it's held up very well. It needs maintenance, and the only area that we had a problem was as you're coming southbound from Warrensburg, the exit 22 off-ramp, but that was as a result of the October 31st, 2019 storm that we had. And they got about 5 inches of rain there, and things backed up. But you know what? They're DOT. They fixed it. We can get on with it. Our office also has funding to go out now to do outfall inspections and sampling. So in our county, we'll go around using this unit here. It's called a YSI meter, and it evaluates different types of parameters, dissolved oxygen, pH, I believe. I'm not going to try to make it up. I'm not smart enough anymore. That's why I have a staff. So they go out and they take it. This is one of the staff, Jake. Looking at taking the same parameters we use in the urbanized areas and saying, hey, here's what we have. Is it flowing? Is it not flowing? If it's flowing, let's do a quick analysis of it. If the analysis shows that it might be problematic, then the next step would be to take a sample and have it sent to a lab for further analysis, and then provide it back to the town of Bolton, town of Lake George, town of Hague, for any type of follow-up. We also worked with the LGA on putting together a grant for the Pioneer Village up in Bolton. So soil and water districts can work on private property. That's how we were set up. I am government, but I am here to help. And what we can do is, provide assistance on planning projects, on implementation projects, and I do site visits all the time. My role has kind of shifted a lot more towards forestry work, but we deal with a lot of different things. We even dealt with rattlesnakes before, which was a really odd one, but we did. So Pioneer Village had taken the initiative to do some proper bust management practices on a steep slope. They did a good job, but they needed some additional inputs. So working with the LGA said that they would put in an application to the Basin Program for funding for a planning project. Pioneer Village is not unlike many other areas around Lake George. High density, older homes, limited space to do work for improvements. So right now, that grant is, have you actually gotten a contract for it yet? Okay, yeah, that's the other problem. We're in the same boat on many things, but it's in the mail, I'm sure. So we're moving forward on that and look forward to working on that. And when we're looking at stormwater, what are we concerned with in our office? We're looking at the soil because most people don't understand what soil is. There's 455 different soil types in New York State. And some of them have more clay, some have more silt, some have more sand, some don't have one or the other. But soil is not just, dirt. It's sand, silt, and clay particles. You have air or pore spaces. There's a certain level of water called field capacity and organic matter. And what I have living in the town of Thurman is completely different than what's here, than what's different in Glens Falls. Here's up in the town of Bolton. This was a cross section that was dug out that I took a picture of, and you can see the gradation as you have the humus layer, you have the organic layer, you have all that decaying, you have getting down towards the parent material. So it's very important to know what the soils are. So at your house, what can you do? Consider green infrastructure, something I'm totally on board with. I love green infrastructure because it's so straightforward and simple. Don't look at it as a one-off. It's a longevity. This is small battles. Winning the small battle is important. But you want to also have a project that you can maintain. And understand you can't always get what you want, so you have to be practical with it. See the color of this water? It's kind of aquamarine green. That's one of our interns a number of years ago. That's because someone, and this was not in the Lake George watershed, it was down in Queensbury. They had a pond that had algae in it. You could get the aqua shield. It's a tint, nothing more than a tint. But when it's applied to reduce the amount of algae in there, it's considered an herbicide. Well, there's a time and a place to apply it. The gentleman put it at the outlet of their pond after a 3-inch rainstorm, and it flowed right out. And we found it while we were doing our stormwater work. The contacted the town had to follow up. It was an education type of thing. The guy wanted a, you know, he wanted a clean pond. I understand, but you have to be smart about it. You can't just dump it in and cross your finger and say it's going to work. So a typical cross section of something that a lot of us see, this is, you know, a biofiltration system. It's a rain garden. Simple concept. I don't even like to say polluted water, because, you know, being a kid of the 70s, I grew up with the Saturday morning cartoons and the images of the smokestacks, the images of the garbage washing up on the commercials. Fortunately, Scooby-Doo would come on, so it made me happy again. But, you know, for the most part, I would take stormwater over wastewater, you know, dealing with it. But you have this stormwater runoff. It's coming into an area that it will be detained or retained and allowed to infiltrate or evaporate. The plants are going to take up nutrients that are in there, so your phosphorus and nitrogen. The soil bacteria is very incredible. It can break down virtually anything. It's going to help lock up some of that nutrient level, some of the heavy metals even. It'll start breaking items down, and then it's filtering through. It's not very different if any of you have been out of the country and used a Berkey water system. You know, it goes through. And, you know, it just clarifies itself. And if it has to because of volume, because remember that peak rate of discharge, the time of concentration is altered, then it can go into bypass. And around here, most of the time it would go into bypass into a little rock line ditch or a green grass swale and be on its merry way. So it's very simple to do something like that. I like to practice what I preach. I did it from my house, again, and I live in the middle of nowhere in Thurman, but I did it. So develop a plan that meets your needs and what you are willing to maintain. If you can't maintain it, if you're not willing to maintain it, don't even consider it. Hire a reputable contractor. Simple projects are not necessarily easy. You know, so many people, I can do that. No, you can't. Okay? And that's why there are professionals, and look for someone who has experience. Look for someone who has the ability to make alterations as necessary. And generally look for people with equipment. Whenever you create a soil disturbance, stabilize it as soon as possible. That's one of the biggest things. Actually, if you can keep soil in place on the ground, you have prevented a problem. It's not that you've stopped a problem, you've just prevented it. So keep your soil in place. Seed it, mulch it, cover it, lock it up. And maintain afterwards. Before starting a project, get a soils analysis conducted. Very important. You can ask our office, we can step you through it, or simply call your local cooperative extension. It's very simple to do. It's about $17. It's going to give you recommendations for soil health, soil improvements. Consider organic alternatives in composting leaves and grass clippings. However, just because it's all natural doesn't mean it's always good for you. You know, look at lead and arsenic. So make sure you don't over-apply anything. Make sure you apply it at the correct time. You put a bunch of compost down and it washes right off that side hill into the lake. It may not be as bad as some of the manufactured items that we put down, but that doesn't mean it's great. It's less bad, all right? Mow at a higher setting. I do that. I don't mow on the highest setting. I mow on one of the higher settings. I keep it a little lower just because of ticks. All right, we a little bit mowed is in my mind a little better. Also, if you have chickens, we have chickens. Our tick population's reduced. I do not believe that chickens focus ticks after ticks. I believe they destroy all the habitat that the ticks live in, and that's the key. Remove small sections of lawn for native plantings. We have a native pollinator program you can sign up for if you want to move from 100 to 500 square feet of turf grass, and we'll give you the wildflower seed. Minimize herbicides, pesticides, and along waters and in wetlands, create or conserve buffers. Now, the last thing I'll close with is, this may have nothing to do with what we're talking about today, but Chris has seen enough of my presentations to know that I go in whatever direction I really want to. So in my world, this gentleman is Jerry Apps. He's a professor emeritus from University of Wisconsin-Madison. And he had a great quote, and because we had to convert this to a PDF, I have to take my glasses off and read this. But thank you, Lindsay, for getting it for me. I appreciate it. So, Professor Apps said, I finally realized that my roots were in the land, and no matter what I said or what I did, I could not deny this. Who I am today originates from the home farm, from my neighbors' dusty roads, country schools, small towns, and especially the land. The land is a powerful teacher. The land taught me patience. It produces a crop in its time, not according to my schedule. The land taught me wonder. The surprise that comes from planting a tiny seed and seeing it grow in one summer into a corn plant 7 feet tall. The land taught me respect, to not abuse it by plowing up and down the hills or planting huge fields that the wind can sweep across, causing soil and crops to wash or blow away. And perhaps, most importantly, the land taught me to never forget that we are but visitors, temporary stewards, and what we do on the land will dramatically affect those who follow. Caring for the land is one way to care for the future. Those ideas and ideals can be applied to everything that we do here. And it doesn't matter what you do. If you want to put a lawn in, I have no problem with that. If you want to plant trees, I have no problem with that. And really, if you're doing it on your own property, what business of it is of mine? But if we can provide a message of conservation, that's the important thing, the overall goal. What can we do better? My mom always said, everything in moderation. And that's what I kind of go by. I look for reasonableness. That's how I try to approach our office. I have a wonderful staff. If you're in Warren County, we can come out and do a site visit if you have any questions. We partner with the LGA. And I had my 1 minute warning. Thank you. That was actually the best stuff I've ever seen, because usually I stand back there and go like that. So I like the Vanna cards. So, and I'll turn it over to Monica.
All right, thank you so much, Jim. I'm Monica, the Managing Program Director of the Lake George Association, and I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of the LGA programs that we have involving stormwater. So we actually have about 16 active stormwater projects happening, and some of them are involving water quality monitoring and research. So the goal here is to study these streams that enter Lake George and see how impacted or polluted they are, see what's happening in them, and then take that data and be able to then advocate for mitigation projects. So Fairy Brook was actually brought to us by a concerned citizen, and so we've been studying that, and we're going to do a watershed assessment for Fairy Brook for the sub-watershed, and then take that data and then be able to determine what projects we need to do to help that stream out. And Jim had mentioned Westbrook, and so we're currently studying and just sampling and monitoring Westbrook just to make sure that everything that was installed there is doing what it's supposed to be doing. The LGA also has a lot of land use programs, one of them being our low impact development certification program. So it's similar conceptually to LEED, except for instead of like green living and solar and that type of thing, it's your impact on the environment and with development. So that's a great program. We're looking to get that put into different town codes so that there's tax incentives if you get LID certified. Right now we're written into the Lake George Town Code, but there's no tax incentive, so stay tuned, we're still working on that. We also partner heavily with municipalities and homeowners associations. Jim mentioned a bunch of those projects, and this year we're really excited to work with the Pioneer Village on their stormwater issues. So hopefully everyone has heard this by now, but we have a Lake Protector app that we're very proud of. If you're a homeowner, you can input your property into the app, and it will tell you everything you need to know about your property's regards to the environmental impact that you'll have. So it will tell you about slopes, streams, soils, everything, and then based on the data for your property, it will output recommendations of things that you can do to have a better environmental impact. And if you get to that point and you actually want some more, even more customized solutions, we also provide site visits as well. Jim had mentioned that they do too, so you have lots of resources. But we'll send a staff member out to your site to chat with you about the issues that you're experiencing and provide some suggestions on things you can do. The Waterkeeper is also very involved with construction in the watershed. Thank you so much, Chris. Chris attends all of the planning and zoning meetings in every municipality around the state, every single one. And he's there to make sure that all of the code and law that is in place to protect the environment is being adhered to with these projects, and then also to provide suggestions. The LGA also has a lot of stormwater-related community science programs. So CSLAP is a New York State program, and that is water sampling. There's a ton of lakes in the Adirondacks that are involved. It's basically just taking water samples, you send them to the state, and then those are analyzed. And then at the end of the year, the state will provide an analysis of it. So if you actually go on the CSLAP website, you can look up any lake that is involved in this program, and it's a whole analysis of the water quality. It's really, really cool. WAVE is another DEC program, but this one is regarding streams. So if you have kids, this is a really good one too, to go kick around in streams. We're looking for samples of macroinvertebrates in these streams, and then those get sent into, oops, it's supposed to be on this side, those get sent down to the state in these little tubes that you see here. And the reason macroinvertebrates are important is because some are very pollution sensitive and others aren't. So the ones that you find in the stream is a really good initial indicator of how polluted or impacted that stream could be, and then the state analyzes it at a deeper level. The MS4 program is a partner with Lake George. And there's a bunch of different parts to this, but the LGA works on the education side of it. And the main thing here is the storm drain markers that you see in the village. A lot of other cities have them too. And Lake George Environmental Club, I believe it was, just helped us with this year. They mapped out where all the markers were and where they needed to go, and then went and installed them. So that was really great. And our last program here is the Lake George Cleanup Day. Last year was our first one, and we're having another one this year, September 15th. It was such a success. We had over 100 people meet us in the village to clean up down there. You also don't have to come to the village. You can just clean up wherever you want. You can clean up on your property and your water, whatever you want to do, but please join us for that. The LGA also thinks it's super important to invest in these programs and things that we are telling people that they need to get done, because without the money, nothing's going to happen. So Jim spoke about Westbrook and I-87, so we've invested heavily into those programs. Something else that's really fun that I wanted to mention is this porous pavement vacuum. So if you install porous pavement, the reason that the water can permeate through is because there's a lot of gaps in it, right? But over time, because those gaps are there, it can fill with dirt and soil and things, which clogs it up, so then it can't permeate, the water can't permeate. So you actually need to vacuum it out every now and then, which is really interesting. So we helped purchase this for the town, and I believe all the local towns share it. And lastly, this will be mentioned a little bit later, but we have a lake impact fund that we're very excited to announce. We're going to have money for stormwater projects as well as septic projects. So for stormwater, grants are going to be up to $2,500. They're going to require a homeowner match and also require some financial need. And so those last two stipulations are also going to go for the septic program, and Chris will talk a little bit about that. But this program has not been launched yet. We're still working on the application process, so stay tuned. If you want to be the first to know about when this goes live, please sign up for our newsletter, because we will be announcing it there. And after, if you have any questions about any of our LGA grant programs, please come speak to me. So what can you do regarding stormwater? Jim spoke a little bit about what you can do more in a context of like a project that you're working on, but outside of that, what can you do? Obviously, if you have something, a project that you want to get done, apply for an LGA grant and we'll help you fund it. Volunteer for any of our great community science programs. If you have a project that you're gonna have to submit plans to your town for, work with the Waterkeeper first. Don't wait until it goes to the meeting and they're discussing it there. If you contact us in advance, Chris can work with you right off the bat in making sure that you're having the least impact with this project on the lake as possible. And then when you get to that approval process, Chris has already seen it and approved it, and everything will go really smoothly, and the lake will be very happy. You can also get LID certified and request a site visit, as I had mentioned. So in order to do that, you can sign up for the Lake Protector app, and there's actually a little tab on the side where you can fill out a form to request that visit. And lastly, advocate and educate within your social circles. So thank you all so much for coming out. We have some people online, which is so exciting, but there's only so many people we can communicate directly with. So we really rely on our lake protectors to take the information that they've learned and spread that to other people within your groups that we might not be able to connect with. So with that, we'll take some questions.
Yeah, first one, Jim, you're up. Back to you, which is how often does the hydraulic separator have to be cleaned, and is it easy to do that?
Yes, if you have the right equipment, which fortunately I believe all the communities around the lake have or have access to. It's not anything that's really different than almost what they would use to clean out a septic system. Town of Queensbury actually just purchased a brand new one. Their old one was about 25 years old, and you know, every time they took it out, a part fell off. So they had to invest in it. Not cheap. This thing is, you know, I think about $500,000. Yeah, so that's the whole thing. You can throw in every kind of project that you want, but that's why I was saying, you know, either at your level or a municipal level, you have to be able to maintain it. And we like to put things in the ground, under the ground, on top of the ground, and say, hey, we're done. You know, the Ron Popeil said it and forget it. And no, maintenance is critical, and things are used, and there's a certain lifespan. So, yes, there's the ability to get that cleaned out. It's kind of a monitoring thing. So generally what you would do is clean it out in the spring to remove the material from winter, fall that has gotten into there. And then you do a quick inspection and, if necessary, a early fall clean out. But I've helped the town of Queensbury clean one out. If you know where the Enterprise Rent-A-Car across from Price Chopper is on Route 9, there's a big system in there, different than what I showed you. But yeah, the vacuum truck comes back, they back up, you open it up, it looks like an elephant trunk, it gets dropped down in there. There's actually a bag that they push up into the inlet channel, they inflate remotely, so it blocks it, creates a weir, the system goes into bypass for that period of time. Then you have to put a water pump in there, draw the water down, discharge it appropriately so it's not just going right into the stream, and then remove it much like a septic system maintenance program. So that's basically what it is. That's one of those that I said, you know, very simple but not necessarily easy. So it's a stepped process, but it's not anything a highway department can't handle.
Perfect. All right, we'll do one more question. In analyzing phosphorus levels, can you separate natural sources like tree leaves versus other sources?
They have, yeah, I'm not a research scientist. I usually look at the people who are here and I joke around. I'm like, I am certainly the Joey Bag of Donuts of this presentation this morning. But I would defer to Chris, or perhaps Monica has information on that. I have seen breakdowns of, you know, this much phosphorus is coming from the urbanized area, this much from this, and I think generally I almost think it's like 2 to 3% natural deposition. And again, you have deposition out there right now, and we had the pollening 2 weeks ago. You know, you have all that pollen. You know, what's it? And you have these minute particles adhering to whatever's getting onto the ground and then flowing down somewhere. And so it can have an impact. And that impact is going to be exacerbated if we continue to see the type of events that we have the warming, we have the intensity of rains. You're just going to have more and more items flushed down. And when you get into that cycle, it's hard to break that cycle because it's the chicken and the egg. We're feeding it, and then we're extracting it, and it's feeding up here, and then it's going back down there, and you know, so we have to deal with it. So I guess that plays into the other role that I have for soil and water. I'm the hazard mitigation coordinator for the county, so I get to deal with post-damage impacts, but working with communities like, hey, what can we do to make you more resilient, if you've heard of that term. You know, what can we do, culverts, other sustainable projects. So it's all tied together, but yeah, I would talk to Chris or maybe Phil or Monica.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jim and Monica. Next, there's another question. You can get that at the break. How would that be? Next, we're going to hear from Chris Novitsky from the Lake George Association on wastewater. After he's done, we're going to have that break, and we can have questions in between.
Thank you, Lee. And just to close out the question to Jim, the answer is yes, you can tell the difference. So I'm here to talk, always good to talk wastewater right before your break. So we will do that and get you all excited. So we're going to give you the basics of septic systems and then talk you through what the impacts are, how they function, the do's and don'ts. We'll get into some replacements. And, you know, septic systems can cause problems, if you don't maintain them and you're not aware of them. So clearly you want to know your system, you want to be aware, and, you know, maintenance is going to be a key, and hopefully you'll take that away. So this is what we call our heat map of the septic systems in the Lake George Basin. These red dots are properties and septic systems. There is a total of 6,000 systems within the Lake George Basin. And if you notice, there are areas where you don't see them. The Lake George Village, there's a wastewater plant. Up in Bolton, they're connected to a municipal plant. Up in Hague, and then also, you know, Black Point Road up in Ticonderoga, that goes to the Ticonderoga plant. So, and the Park Commission's inspection program involves about 2,700 of these. So now we are able to get 2,700 of these systems under inspection. The colored Lake George was actually to be an overlay. What that was to show the impacts that actually septic systems can have. That was actually the color code for chlorophyll A levels, or the microscopic algae that you see in the lake. Red being the higher numbers, green being lower. And if you see, there's a little correlation between the number of septic systems and the level of chlorophyll A. So clearly, septic systems, as well as stormwater runoff, as Jim did such a good job in talking about, have an influence on water quality, and this is what happens. You start seeing that algae growing. The impacts of wastewater, human health, obviously E. coli, bacteria can have health concerns. Nutrient pollution, the way that those nutrients leach into the lake and provide that food for algae. And we see that increased algae growth can have impacts, obviously, to recreation. If you've got algae washing up on beaches, there's very prominent property in the town of Bolton where they don't use their own beach because of the amount of algae that's washing up. And obviously that can impact people's property values. The thing only pops up for me. So how does your septic system work? This is what we call a conventional system. Works by gravity, very passive. Jim talked about that. You put it in the ground and it works by itself. Sometimes that's a problem because people think, oh, I just flush and it's gone. But there's really a few components to a septic system. The primary treatment is a septic tank. And we have a cross section here that actually shows the chambers and components where the solids come in and drop out. You have some pipes and baffles so that greases and oils won't flow through and get into your field and clog it. You have a distribution box where actually the water comes in, the effluent out of the tank, and then gets distributed out to the field, which is really, there's different types of absorption fields. A typical system will have perforated pipes surrounded with gravel, but we'll get into some alternative systems. And then there's other site variables. There could be hills you need to pump up, so you could have a pump chamber in that as well. That's typically how a septic system works. And those could last, if they're maintained, 40 to 50 years. So it is It can function. It does well at water quality protection, but you need to maintain that, and I'm going to say that a few more times. So taking a look, this is your septic tank. Great to look in that, isn't it? But we talked about the importance of a baffle to prevent those solids from going right through the tank and flowing out. What you want is a calming environment so that when water comes in, as it comes in through use, washing machines, it will take time. It will flow through there slowly and solids will drop out, and you want what they call the gray water going out to get further treatment. The distribution box, again, so it comes out of the septic tank, trickles down to here, and then you want to distribute this evenly across your absorption field. And it's very important because this water is kind of trickling. It's sometimes when you pump, it'll come in at greater volumes. So they actually have these things called baffle wheels or levelers, because sometimes these boxes get settle a little bit, as things do in the ground, where you can overload particular sides. So you actually can twist these so that you actually have an even elevation across your distribution box. One point, you take a look at this one, you see some of that gray standing water in there. That's actually a condition of failure, because this box, you can see the water is halfway up in the pipes, so therefore it is not draining into the field, and that is actually a condition of failure with the system. And then your absorption field. I always like following Jim Lieberman because he talks about things and saves me time. But we talked about the soils and how it was important and how you want aeration in your soils. And that's very important for the septic system, because that's why you have gravel. You want air coming in. You want air, the oxygen for the bacteria that will help treat, because this is where your treatment actually occurs in your septic system. This is where you get the biological treatment, you get the bacteria, you get the chemical treatment, where these nutrients, contaminants, will actually adhere, bond to the soils, and prevent that from leaching down into the groundwater. This is a alternative system. It's actually a half pipe that's put in an infiltrator system so that there's actually air all through that. And what that actually does is opens up the soil even more, because with the gravel, you actually lose about 40% of the soil for that effluent to go into because of the gravel, because the gravel's in contact with the soil. There is no gravel, and it's actually 100% open soils to the effluent, so you actually can even improve your treatment. System failure. How do we have that line up top? I'm sorry about that. So how do you know your system is failing? Obviously, backup. If you see backup in your pipes, if you see backup into your house, that's obviously failure, right? If you see green grass grows over the septic system, you've always heard. Well, there's an evidence of it, and really, do you smell an odor? That is usually a good sign for failure too. So these are things that you can do. If you have problems, you hear gurgling in your house, you know, those are ways that you can figure out that you've got a failure. Septic system maintenance, very important. How can you maintain your system? Conserve water is one of the best things you can do. You know, don't run your showers long. Think about conservation toilets. You know, you have toilets that can actually reduce your gallons that you use from 5 gallons, the older toilets, to down to 1, less than that, gallon per flush. Very important. That saves your system and saves the burden on it. Pump your tank to remove the solids. So important. You should be doing that every 3 to 4 years. Inspect that system. Make sure that those baffles are in place. When you pump that tank, or it's done by a certified pumper, you actually see the condition of the tank, see if water's coming in from the outlet. If it is, that's a problem, obviously. It means your field is clogged. Maintain your lawn. The reason we say that, you don't want trees growing over your absorption field. Roots love nutrients. I've seen so many pipes where roots just grow right into it, and that winds up being a clogged system again. Protect from traffic, as Jim talked about earlier, compacting the soils. So you need that aeration in your soils. You drive over your septic field, you're actually destroying that basis for your treatment. So very important to keep traffic from off your fields. Here's a picture of somebody coming in to pump out a tank. They have these things right here. They call it a sludge judge, where you actually take kind of a hollow PVC tube, you dip it down into your tank, and you pull it up and you see how many solids are there. You should pump it out when that tank is 1/3 full. And again, that's an average family about every 3 to 4 years. Your do's and don'ts of your system. Do know your system. You should have plans. That way it makes it easier to find where your tanks are and when you need some maintenance. Do contact professionals when experiencing problems. If you're seeing a backup, you're seeing surfacing water, contact somebody, an engineer or a certified septic hauler to find out. Do maintain your system. If you maintain it, this will last 40 to 50 years. If you don't, it's going to last 5 to 10 years. And think about it, what is your most expensive appliance in your home? Your septic system. That's $20,000 to $25,000, even more. So why not maintain that? And protect your system through daily actions. What do you put down your drain goes into your field. So chemicals can really upset the way a system works. The septic systems work on bacteria, as Jim said earlier, breaks down the pollutants, the loading. You put down chemicals, you put down pesticides, those will kill the bacteria. That's what makes your system work. So think about that. The don'ts. Don't connect your water softener. You think about, we just talked about how it works with bacteria. How did they preserve meats years ago? They used salt. What happens with a water softener? The byproduct of that is salt. You put that in your septic system, it's going to destroy your septic system. Don't add gasolines, as I said. Don't install garbage disposal. That actually puts a huge biological demand on your system. If you do put in a garbage system, you actually have to make a larger septic system, a larger tank to accept those wastes and the oxygen demands that come from that. Don't flush flushable wipes. They're not flushable. And this is the one thing I give these septic talks a lot. This last one, if you remember one thing, don't ever use Rid-X. It is the worst thing that you can do. Oh, put this in your tank and you will never have to pump it. Well, what happens to the solids? What happens is they rise up and go out in your field and clog it, and that's what will happen. So if you remember one thing and what the water keeper says, don't ever use Rid-X. So other technologies, we have enhanced wastewater treatment systems. We have gravelless systems. We kind of talked about the gravelless peat filter. That's what this photo is. You actually have chambers. Those are about 4 by 6 filled with peat. So you actually, from your septic tank, your effluent goes into the peat, and the biology in the peat that lives on the moss actually helps filter, remove the pollutants, and then that trickles into your absorption field. And then raised systems, where you have constrained soils, where you have clay soils, you may have to bring in some soil to help with that treatment process. So this is a cross section. You may have heard Elgin systems. What this is really a kind of a bundle of plastic, which is kind of rolled up, woven, wrapped tight. And what it does is, as you can see the dimensions, it's 3 by 4 by 7 inches. And this actually takes the place of the gravel. This actually provides air to come in. And the one thing that's really neat that people don't think about, so when you're building a system and you drive these trucks with all these tons of gravel and dump it in, what's that doing? It's compacting soils. This, you can actually have guys just walk in with them on their shoulders, put it in the ground, and you reduce all that burden on the soils. These are actually an approved system where you can reduce the size of your absorption field. Very important that they have a layer of soil at the bottom, and that's a specifications, but you get to be allowed to reduce your area of your absorption field due to the higher pollutant removal with this. This is a cross-section of what is called an aeration system, enhanced treatment. It's actually got 3 chambers. You'll have a settling chamber right here where your effluent comes in. It trickles into an anaerobic tank, which is very good for removal of nitrogen. This brand actually has plastic balls there, so you've got bacteria that will grow on that. Bacteria needs oxygen, but it's an anaerobic system, so when nitrates come in, NO3, they break down the nitrates to get their oxygen, and then the effluent trickles over into the aeration part of the system where you actually have a blower blowing air in. It has clarification, drops more solids out, and then the aeration actually recycles it to the head of the plant again. It's actually a mini treatment plant, the same size as a septic tank, and the effluent is again much higher quality and reduces your need of the size of your absorption field. This is actually a newer system. It's called a shallow system, where you're constrained to depth of water. You can actually raise this system up, and you have a little bit of a pump system that actually helps distribute that and spread it out. Sometimes they actually don't put the plastic over that, and they actually can use a wildflower mix, and it gets uptaken by the mix. So you actually use the vegetation to help treat your effluent. Some examples of replacement systems where we have constrained sites, where you have limited soils, where you have homes that are right next to the lake. What can you do? I mean, these homes are there, they're older camps. To upgrade, what can they do? So they can actually, again, bring in some soil here, build that up, and actually pump it up the hill. You can see some of the pump chambers there, and you bring in your higher quality treatment tanks, the enhanced treatment systems, and build these systems up, build these sites up. So here's a site, again, right along the lake. You got this little kind of feature on your deck, but that actually is covering your enhanced septic system. And then from there, you can actually pump that up the hill, bring it to where there's the soils. Again, soils, steep slopes, what do? You got a home here, they need to replace their system. So on the far side of the house, they put in, again, you bring in, where you're limited with the size of the field that you can put in, you need to provide some of that treatment in the tank itself. So you bring in your enhanced septic tank, and then you actually build that soil up here with that retaining wall. Give it a level area, give it plenty of soil so that it can sink through, and let the soil do the treatment. Questions on the Lake George Park Commission septic regulations. 2023, Lake George Park Commission put in and adopted the septic regulations, which require every system within 500 feet of the lake or 100 feet of regulated streams are going to be inspected once every 5 years. It's a rotating inspection system. So they're roughly 2,700 systems, so it's going to be about 540 systems a year. There's 3 classifications. There's a failing, which means you need to replace that within 6 months. There is a substandard, which means you may have a pipe that's out of line, or a tank that might be cracked or need a replacement. So they give you about 5 years, and then you're passing. The first year that they had, roughly about 20 to 25% systems were failing. About the same amount were substandard, and about 50% were passing, which is about the average where there are places that put in management systems. And that's why this program was so important. So you think about it, 50% of the systems were not adequately treating wastewater. and needed to either be replaced or significant improvements made. Some of the increases that they put in to improve treatment was an increased separation standard to groundwater. Typically, New York State Department of Health had a 2-foot separation. They actually increased it to 3 feet. Again, we talked about the importance of soils. That's where most of your treatment is. That's why they wanted it. Also, the importance of getting that air in there. If you have higher groundwater, you have less air that goes into to provide that oxygen. And this was recommended by an advisory committee. I was part of that. There was town officials that were part of that. There was the county planning department was part of that, as well as some local engineers. And here, if you go to the Lake George Park Commission website, you can actually put in your address and find out when your system is up for inspection by the Park Commission. So, funding your new septic systems. We had a website we created a few years ago, safesepticsystems.org. We actually partnered with local banks, Adirondack Trust and Glens Falls National, for low and no interest loans. So if you're looking at upgrading your system, please go visit them and see about that, how that can work for you. New York State has septic system replacement funds, Warren County Planning Department, Washington County Soil and Water, and Essex County. They can give up to $10,000 grant funding. And again, the Lake Impact Fund, this will be a program that will be announced shortly, where it will be a matching grant program. Again, you get the engineered plans, you get your estimate and submit that, and that the LGA will provide a matching grant for you that will also help you with the other grant programs that are available here. Some of our work, municipal wastewater treatment systems. We focused on septic systems, but we work with municipalities. We worked with the town of Lake George, their replacement system, which is working tremendously. They used to have violations every month at their treatment plant. But now they actually have not had any violations since their new plant went on. And they used to have nitrate levels. The standard was 10. That was the limit. They were actually upwards of 25 milligrams per liter. They are now below 2. So you can see it's an incredible success. Worked with the town of Bolton, a wood chip bioreactor. Again, we talked about the anaerobic systems where we actually dig a trench, fill it with wood chips, run your effluent through there, and that bacteria actually cleans up that effluent. Worked with Hewlett's Landing, Hague. We provided a grant for their SBR sequence batch reactor. North Queensbury, I saw Sal here earlier. A few years ago, we were providing grants again for the updating of that bay, who actually created a management district and the North Queensbury district, as well as working with the folks on Rockhurst to try to improve their properties which are so small they cannot actually have compliant systems. So can we put in a system that we actually remove the effluent and sewage from the actual point? We monitor around the Lake George Village system. We monitor around the Bolton Landing system. This is the aerial around Bolton where we monitor the streams and the tributaries around that. I actually see the influence because you talk about the soils around Lake George, they're sandy. Although there's no surface discharge, we actually find these streams, see the influence of the wastewater plants, because we monitor them well upstream, and then by the time they get down past where the plant is, we actually see the higher contaminant and nitrate levels. The LGA's investment, as we talked about, the North Queensbury, Dunham's Bay District, the Rockhurst Sewer District, you can see the amount of funding that we have put in towards these various projects. And again, the Lake Impact Fund, upwards of $400,000, will be available for grants. And what can you do for your own system? So you need to know your system, you need to maintain it, you need to inspect it, you need to protect it. Again, don't dump chemicals and whatnot down there. And what did I say never use? Rid of. Thank you. It made my day. And educate, understand your system, understand your water usage, and that's it. I always like to work a picture of my daughter in. This is why we do it. She's jumping off of Agnes Island. We want to keep the water clean, and so we can all enjoy it. So thank you.
We do have a few questions that have come in. The first one, is it a problem if there's a forest growing over a 30-year absorption field?
Yes. No, the roots are very, very bad. The roots will go and seek those nutrients, seek the moisture, and they will really, they'll clog the pipe, so yes.
Next question, does the Lake George Park Commission inspection program open up the distribution box for examination, or do they dig up a sample of soil around the pipes from the distribution box?
Part of their inspection system is you have to have all the tanks exposed so that they can look into it. So yes, you do have to find your distribution box and open it up, because again, it's very important that we know that there's equal distribution through the field.
Okay. And last question, has sewering Black Point Road and Baldwin Road improved water quality in Ticonderoga?
I would say it has. I don't have any water quality information on that, unfortunately, but it would have to, because you're removing any effluent that's going in there, and you're removing it and bringing it to a off-site treatment plant. So I would say that it would, but we don't have the numbers to back that up. Sorry.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Chris. I have a septic system at home. It's not in the watershed, but I'm going to pay more attention to it now. And I want to thank all the presenters for keeping us on time. It's 10:30. We're going to take a 15-minute break, a quick break. If you could be back in your seats in 15 minutes, have some refreshments, and stop by the merchandise table. Thanks, everybody. See you in 15.